Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
If there's any time where people should be stepping out of their comfort zone and educating people on things that they're not comfortable typically educating on, right? Tourette syndrome. Now's the time to do it.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Stoked on this week's episode with a very special guest right ahead. One thing about the quarantine is that obviously it's isolating, but there's been really great communication with you guys. Tweets, DMs, email, and lots of advocacy work for Tourette Awareness Month. Just a good stream of good energy communication right now. Received a message that hit me right in the gut saying that Tourette's podcast, along with the YouTube videos that friend of the podcast, Brittany Wolf, is doing at One Tic at a Time, has helped him to feel comfortable about opening up for the first time about his TS. And he's older than I am. He's 45. I'd say his name here, but I'm not sure if he meant this to be a private email, but that's a category of email that I get. That thoughts of opening up and being more openly vulnerable are much easier to get through, knowing that there's a precedent for it, of people talking in a fun and appreciative way about their TS. And I guess there are a lot of goals of Tourette's podcast, but that's, I guess, my favorite, that we should feel fine being vulnerable. And hopefully the expression of that rolls down to someone else who can be motivated by that. So we have a bigger mass of people who can convey the message. Love hearing from you. Here's a question from a listener named April. Hey, Ben, I was just wondering if you'd like to talk about your most awkward tics. Right now, my most awkward tic is puffing out my belly. It just looks strange. That's an email from April. April, thank you. I've had a lot of awkward tics. Definitely my long-running vocal tics where I go, and That's definitely awkward. A little digression. I was talking with someone the other day, and this is going to be in an upcoming episode, but we talked about how wearing a mask, like a COVID mask, out in public right now, and vocal ticking kind of jams the radar a little bit in terms of people picking up on it or thinking something of it. And I've experienced that. Just something happening psychologically with the masks we're wearing, I think in a general sense. And that's not what we mean when we talk about masking our tics, but there's something in that analogy that's happening in a real sense. I don't know. Almost like I feel more comfortable vocal ticking with the mask on. I feel like you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, just a digression. Back to April's question. In my life, the tic I really didn't like was where I'd widen my eyes. And I guess it would look like kind of like a supervillain thinking of an evil plan. And it got worse when that tic mutated into me widening my eyes and rolling my eyeballs right and left. Widen my eyes go right, and then they go left. Then I would do it again like 20 seconds later. And that's when I know that I saw people picking up on and mimicking at various points in my life. Talking about my most unwanted tics is dangerous because they might return, but the other really awkward one I had during elementary school was where I'd do this bodily maneuver. It looked like I was doing the worm, like that dance move, but standing straight up. Like I would do this like just weird sort of wave move. There's something about curving and extending my body and just feeling a slight bit of strain. Like that was the object of this tic. I hope it never comes back. Thanks for making me talk about it, April. Nah, seriously, thanks for your question. Anyone can ask me anything they want. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Here's another question. How have you been keeping busy during the quarantine? And that comes from a listener named Eric. So the podcast has obviously kept me busy. The day job continues. I have a separate day job, but I'm doing a lot of that remotely. I've had some photography jobs, mainly before the lockdown here. And the cool thing about that is you can take portraits of people without ever really getting all that close to them. Just use a lens with a longer focal length. And that's appropriate for taking portraits of people. Also, I've had some architectural photography jobs. Again, no human contact, and I'm still being cautious and bringing the hand sanitizer everywhere. I actually have a Tourette teal mask that I got from somebody online. I'd say the most enjoyable thing is just, even though it is pretty isolating here, being locked down by yourself, getting a lot of quality time with my dog, Data. And I'd adopted a cat right before the quarantine. advisories. His name is Spot, and that dude is the absolute best. Beautiful cat. I haven't had a cat since I was a kid, and I'd always had these horrible allergies that have somehow just kind of cleared up over the past couple of years. And if you follow my photography account on Instagram, that's at Ben Brown Multimedia. I pretty frequently post pictures of Spot in those stories. And check this out. I can't explain it. I've tried to see if it was some kind of fluke. Seems real. But there is a certain mega celebrity that I think the world of. Like, I love this person to death. And he's been showing up as a viewer of my Instagram stories. Like, this has been going on for a while. People who know me closely know exactly who I'm talking about. Like, I can't get over it. It's probably nothing, but it is his verified Instagram account. And I know he runs it. And he apparently likes to see the pictures of Spot and Data. And the only thing I can figure to explain how this is happening is the algorithms may have paired us up because we both shoot the same kind of camera. We both shoot Leica. And anyway, I'm getting off track from Eric's question. That's the personal news from the quarantine. I've also been kind of redoing my home, painting the walls new colors, just kind of recasting everything, framing photo prints. I've been selling some of those. And that's been fun, seeing your work in print. And I thought I would dig into more reading time. I got a stack of books kind of waiting on me, but I seem to fill out the space with other activities. So short answer, a lot of photography, hanging out with the animals, and trying to resist shoving my arm down a cereal box every 20 minutes. I haven't really seen much of anyone besides my neighbors, and I really do miss seeing my coworkers in person. I miss seeing my folks, but it's been a blast interacting with you guys. And of course, we all have the good energy of Tourette Awareness Month, which we're going to talk about a bit more in this episode with a very special guest. Someone whose actual job is Tourette awareness, advancement, and the movement we've got going on. Hint, hint. Someone professionally at the center of all this. Coming up on this episode of Tourette's Podcast. TourettesPodcast.com is where you can find all the episodes of the podcast, as well as writing submitted by listeners and other people from the community. The latest comes from Shaharah, who we've already inducted into the Tourette's Podcast Hall of Fame for bringing us this musical offering a while back.
That's why I listen to the TS podcast. I listen to the Tourette podcast.
That was awesome. It was such a cool surprise to hear a song about the podcast. By the way, since our audience is so seemingly advanced in the way of music, if you want to write an original jingle for Tourette's podcast, I'm all about it and it'll be played here. Anyway, back to Shaharah. She's also a solid poet, and you have to go to Tourette'sPodcast.com and read her piece titled The Story of the Human Rubberneck. It's great. It's easy to relate to it, but it's told in a clever way, and it's getting a lot of praise. Shaharah, thank you. And for anyone wondering, if you enjoy writing and you have a topic that you think would do well, send me an email at tourettespodcast@gmail.com and tell me about it so we can work it out for the website. We're in the middle of Tourette Awareness Month. Thank you, everyone, for driving the Twitter account at Tourette'sPod to 1,000 followers. Actually, as I speak, we're at 998. But hopefully by the time you're listening to this, we've crossed that threshold, reaching more people. Let's build up the Instagram as well. At Tourette's Podcast is the handle there. Join up, spread awareness. Let's tag one another. Big group effort. Speaking of, so, the Tourette Association of America just had its big annual conference in virtual form over the computer screen because obviously, we couldn't do it in person because of the virus. Still, it was a major success. And it showed what's possible in terms of high-capacity web-based offerings, or gatherings, so to speak. I wanted to talk to TAA about that, catching up on the conference, but also the significance of the topics they covered, from mindfulness in Tourette to cultural dynamics, and just really great conversation topics with lots to explore and to continue on with. And with it being Awareness Month, I also wanted to talk to them about how to maximize this period. May 15th through June 15th every year is Tourette Awareness Month. And, what do we do with it? What should we be doing right now to get the most out of it? So we're about to talk to Amanda Talty, the president and CEO of the Tourette Association of America. It's worth noting real quick, and she was okay with me saying this, she's been dealing with a nightmare of runaround and fumbling with medical staff and administrators who were supposed to be taking care of her mother. Just dealing with them telling her things that she already knows can't be true, in terms of how, treatment processes play out or what means what administratively. There's Medicaid involved. And she said the medical staff she's dealing with seemed to be talking down to her in a prejudicial kind of way, like she doesn't know anything and she just has to go along with what they say. And she's having to fight it with the facts and advocate for her mother. And this is relevant because we so often hear from the Tourette community stories of not being taken seriously by professionals or being treated dismissively. Now, I know that's not everybody or across the board or anything like that. There are amazing doctors and professionals out there, and I've talked to a lot of them. This is not about that. But we do hear a lot of stories like this. It's relatable. And I think with the coronavirus period, we're finding a lot of relatable points with the general public, like navigating insurance difficulties, and even just the general conversation right now about anxiety and mental health. And I'm not saying it's good that these are such anxious times, but we do make the point in this episode, Amanda does, about, if anything, we're finding new ways to connect with the conversation about mental health issues in a broader public sense, less stigmatized because more people seem to be talking about them right now. Maybe changes we need to be making for the better treatment of patients, access, lots of great points in this conversation, which you will hear right now. For the record, could you state your name and the general part of the world you come from and what you do, your title? Just introduce yourself.
Amanda Talty. I am the president and CEO of the Tourette Association of America, and I live in New York.
This conference that you just had, the virtual conference, at first, we were all kind of gearing up for it to be an in-person event. I assume people coming from all over the world, or at least very long distances, a big central event, people in person talking about Tourette syndrome. And then the pandemic hit and the restrictions and the safety measures, couldn't really do it in person. This has happened to conferences all over the place. Mm-hmm. How was TAA able to pivot so quickly to a virtual conference? I imagine there were some logistical nightmares kind of baked into that. How'd you pull it off, and how do you think it went?
Well, so I think what works to our advantage is that because we are a national organization, we tend to host a lot of webinars throughout the year. Typically that's just something that we do. So I think that worked to our advantage a little bit because we were familiar with some of the platforms that were available to do virtual programming. There were no logistical nightmares that anybody made me aware of. Not to say that the staff maybe didn't have some that they triaged without involving me. But I think what made it most possible is, really the presenters, the flexibility in the presenters to really pivot themselves from, a being there in person moment to a virtual format, their willingness to do that. And really the staff was just tremendous in, as soon as we realized we couldn't have this thing in person, they all immediately mobilized to figure out the best way to deliver it virtually. So it was really a fantastic effort on the part of the staff. I take very little credit for it. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that we were able to do it virtually, we were able to touch a lot of people and reach a lot of people that normally maybe we would never come in contact with. We had a tremendous response in terms of people who registered, over 1,000 new people to the TAA, so people who we've never been in contact with before. So it was an exciting moment. I think it was a tremendous success. And I think moving forward, while we will never replace physical conference, I do think, doing the physical conference biennially, so every other year, allows us on those off years now to deliver a virtual conference. So I think this will be a format that remains moving forward and will counterbalance the physical conference in the off years. So we're really excited about it.
This conference, the in-person plan was to be in Minneapolis. Is that something that's still on the table?
Yeah, so we worked with the hotel, and they were very gracious and allowed us to switch our reservation to 2021. So it will be the same weekend in 2021 in Minneapolis as was previously scheduled for this year, but we are now deferring to next year. So the physical conference is in the works for that.
One thing that comes to mind too, is the virtual conference was made free. And, typically with in-person conferences, there's definitely a production budget. And my day job, we do conferences as well. And, it takes a lot to pull them off. A virtual conference, may have sort of a different kind of overhead, but there's still a lot that goes into it. And I know the free admission was made possible by supporters and the generosity of the people who support the TAA. That's a pretty big deal. I mean, it would be a challenge to pull something like that off otherwise without the level of support that people put into TAA. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, not just everything that we do relies on the generosity of the public, of the, companies who, see a value in supporting the Tourette Association philanthropically and the individuals that we serve, right? We are not, we do get some funding through a CDC partnership, which covers, one, portion of our programming, but, everything else that we do is really underwritten by donor dollars. So, without people supporting us philanthropically, we can't do anything. So, we can't. So, I mean, there's a clear difference. If we're talking expenses, obviously a physical conference is always going to be much more expensive than a virtual conference. But we did, it wasn't strictly for that reason that we chose to make it free. It's not lost on us, the impact that COVID and the, associated stay-at-home orders across the country have had on people's income, right? People are losing jobs. I think the last stat was 1 in 5 people are currently unemployed.
Yeah.
So that wasn't lost on us at the time. So we thought it best to create an environment where people could receive the information that they very desperately need and want, in a way that was not going to be prohibitive to them if they found themselves in circumstances where they couldn't afford it. So that was a deliberate choice. Thankfully we were able to get some corporate sponsorship and some sponsorship from some private donors to offset any expenses associated with it. But yeah, I mean, we rely on generosity of others to make possible what we do. So I think moving forward, we'll look at the business model and we'll see, continuing virtual conference on off years, we'll see what makes sense and what we're able to do. But like anything else, it's going to largely be determined on people giving to us.
Okay. Yeah, that's important to remember. Let's talk about the programming itself and what was actually on the agenda for the conference. What was different this year than in past years?
The biggest difference between this year's conference and last year's conference is that we put out an RFP. So we put out a request for presentations. Historically, or at least during my time at the organization, the way conference was traditionally run is, staff would all sit around a table and we'd say, okay, what do we think people want to hear about? And who do we think would be really good to give that talk? And that's how we would move forward. But we thought a better way of doing it this year, and this was obviously even before we knew it was going to be a virtual conference, was to reach out to the community and allow them to make a determination about what they wanted to talk to people about. So we opened that call for proposals up to everybody, to all of our constituents, including all of our physicians, and encouraged everybody to share it out with others that they thought might be interested in presenting. And I think through that effort, we were able to get topics that we at the office may not have thought about, or maybe would not have thought would be the thing to focus on for the community. And I would say, one of the things, and actually based on the attendance that, I personally was very surprised about, although I guess thinking about it makes sense. The number one attended session that we had for virtual conference was mindfulness for tics.
Huh. Okay.
So, how do you be more, mindful of your tics in terms of your management, right? And then the second most attended was resiliency with Tourette, right? Not necessarily, topics that once we saw them and we saw how people were getting attracted to them, obviously made sense to us, but not something that if we were just at a conference room table saying, okay, what do we think people really need to know? I don't think that those are things that would have jumped out at us. So I think that's what really made it different. And, I think that that's the standard that we're going to hold in all future years. I don't think people don't want to hear from people that we think they want to hear from. People want to hear from people that want to actually tell them new and different things. And I think that effort also adds to a real diversity in programming and a real excitement as new talks come up.
So I also thought it was cool to see a session focused on how Tourette syndrome fares in different cultural settings. This is something that we've heard on the podcast from a few different guests who come from different countries, or their families are from different countries, where TS may be viewed differently or acknowledged differently, or maybe even not acknowledged. Is TAA hearing more stories from people in different cultures, and what is there to learn from that kind of thing?
There's a lot to learn from it, and what I'll say is I think we are hearing more stories, and part of the reason why we're hearing more stories is because we're doing more deliberate outreach around this. Tourette syndrome is a highly resource-intensive diagnosis, and I think if you are not in communities where you can access quality health care, or in communities that value physician input, right? You may not be getting the diagnosis. We know that there are 1 million people currently living with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. We know that half of them are going undiagnosed. And you can see from the demographics, just in the demographics of who attended conference, 77% of people who signed up for this virtual conference were Caucasian. So, we really, in knowing that, and knowing that typically it is the Caucasian community who the TAA has most interacted with, for whatever reason, we did decide a couple of years ago, and I think this past year really focused on it more deliberately than ever, to create a diversity committee to really begin looking at how do we begin to infiltrate and how do we begin to reach out to underserved communities and communities of color, because we know that TS doesn't discriminate. We know it hits all communities the same, but if the only people we are really connecting with are people in the Caucasian community, and that means there's a large portion of individuals that we're missing. So we've really done a lot of work to deliberately seek out individuals who, are of color, are of cultural background differences, and get them to tell their stories more and to be out in public with it more, because our hope is that will then attract others from those same communities to come to us and seek the services that we can provide.
I definitely think that's important to give people sort of examples that when you see people who kind of represent your walk of life and they're talking about something that you can relate to that you don't get to talk about very much openly. TS is a great example of that, obviously, but really anything, any sort of, job function, just anything. When you see an example, when you see yourself in the example, then it makes it more comfortable for you to open up and talk about it. And I think that's a really great move on part of the TAA to kind of help to boost that. And I love the virtual quilt that has been a project of the TAA, kind of inviting people to kind of come forward and tell their stories. And it's all kind of, knitted together in a quilt-like way to where it does form a very big picture in a sort of a diverse picture of what TS is. And you're right, it doesn't discriminate by community, skin color, or anything like that. It can affect everybody in all ways.
Right. I mean, it sort of harkens back to the first time we ever spoke, right? So the first time we ever spoke, we were talking about the efforts that the TAA was making to better serve the adult community, adults living with TS, because as an organization, we had been so focused on families and children, right? So, I think this is in that vein, right? We knew as an organization we were not serving adults in the way that we needed to and wanted to, and this is another piece of that. We know that we're not serving communities with cultural differences and, communities of color and communities that are underserved in the way that we want to and in the way that we would like. So we're now making deliberate efforts to focus on that as well.
Be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit Tourette.org, Tourette.org. Good segue into Awareness Month, which we're in the middle of, and we're seeing a lot of cool homegrown ways of messaging this, people going on social media, making little videos, telling their stories, TikTok, things like that. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the most effective ways to make the most of the awareness period that we're in? And, any kind of fact-based and respectful awareness of TS is important, but is there anything right now that you think is especially important to push during Awareness Month?
Stories, personal stories, right? I mean, one of the things that I've always struggled with, being with the TAA is, how do you get people that don't live with Tourette syndrome to connect with Tourette syndrome? How do you get people that think that they don't know a single person living with Tourette syndrome, which we know is wrong, right? But so many people think that they don't know anybody who has Tourette syndrome. They don't know anybody who has a tic disorder. How do you get them to care about something that they don't attach themselves to? And the only way you can really do that is to share your story. Once people immediately around you know your story, and then maybe share your story with somebody immediately around them, right? That awareness, that's really the power of it. We at the Tourette Association try to do it as much as we can, but we can't be in every corner all the time. So, I think people sharing their stories, I think people's close-knit circle around them, the folks that accept them for who they are, and the folks who support them during their challenges, them sharing their stories, the caregivers, the educators, the people who don't live with it but are always there for the person living with it, them sharing their stories. I think that makes the condition relatable to other people. Right. So I think sharing out stories, obviously participating and sharing out information from the Tourette Association of America, anything that we can do to get more people to our website to take advantage of the resources and educate themselves about the condition is important. Participating in our events. We have Miles for Tourette currently happening right now, where we're asking people to walk in support of the Tourette Association and raise some money. Get involved socially, to your point, take advantage of the quilt, and just go to Tourette.org/awareness and look at what we have there and really share it with everybody that you know. Share it with people you don't know. Don't. I guess this is if there's any time where people should be stepping out of their comfort zone and educating people on things that they're not comfortable typically educating on, right? Tourette syndrome. Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to do it, because there is a lot happening socially, on the social networks. There's a lot of communication that we're sending out. So now is really the time to make the most of your voice and let people know that they should care.
As we are in a situation where we're all kind of locked down and things are changing as we speak, but for the past little while, we've just kind of been at our homes. There's been a lot of downtime, and I think there's been a lot of screen time, but making the most of that we're in a period where our efforts toward awareness can kind of get in people's faces or spaces a little bit more easily. And I've been really impressed at how enterprising the community has been with, the short videos on Twitter and Instagram stories and so on, sharing facts. It is the tone that people have taken has been really cool and not really shame-based, not sort of like, hey, there's no investment of like embarrassment or anything like that. People are just kind of talking about it matter-of-factly and even saying, this is something that's been uncomfortable for me and I've been living with, but just the sort of like tone of courage that comes from that has been really, really neat to see.
Well, I think to your point too, about, obviously this whole quarantine and pandemic has had a lot of negative impact on individuals, but I think, the other piece of it is look, the Tourette community lives every day, right, with anxiety, lives every day with OCD, lives every day with executive functioning issues, right, lives every day with these things. But, now people who are outside of the community are talking more about how this pandemic is affecting them, right? People across the board with Tourette syndrome, not with Tourette syndrome, are experiencing heightened anxiety, are feeling isolation, right? They're feeling all of these things. So many more people are really feeling and swimming in these emotions that are just always there for people in Tourette community. So I don't want to discount that as a real reason why maybe people in our community feel more comfortable talking about it too, because when you have the news constantly talking about, anxiety and the increase in anxiety, COVID and anxiety, COVID and depression, COVID and this, COVID and that, right?
Yep.
Then if you're always living with it, now you can say, well, hey, I live with this every day. This is what you're feeling now is what I feel most of the time. And now it's multiplied, right? Now for me, it's times 10, right? But there's just a general sensitivity to what being in this isolation does to a person. And I think that too creates an environment where people are more willing and maybe able to talk about it.
That's a really great point. And my day job has nothing to do with Tourette syndrome. What I do, sort of during the 9 to 5 is I do multimedia work. I produce a magazine, but it's in the space of something else entirely. But someone did come up when we were planning out the next issue, came up to me and said, one thing we might want to consider covering is a mental health aspect of the pandemic. A lot of people are feeling anxiety. A lot of people, I was like, yeah, like, at your service. That was a topic brought to me from the outside. Yeah. And I was like, yes. And we did have a little conversation about the sort of like, I've got some diagnoses that kind of speak to this sort of thing. And I talk frequently with a lot of people who deal with, things like OCD and things that are really, really ramped up right now. And, and then there's the general tone of the world in a certain way. There's a lot of good that's happened in the pandemic, obviously, the way people come together. At the same time, there's a lot of animosity and a lot of contention, and that can really kind of sit with you and get you to think and make you nervous about the times you do have to go to the grocery store. And that's on top of the general sort of like, I have TS. There are peculiar things about me people might pick up on. That is every day for me, no matter what. And that's it does become a really relatable on-ramp to say like, well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about anxiety. Let me tell you something. And it's a really cool way that I've seen people adopt.
Yeah, and I think for, those of us who sort of live in this world, and just to be clear, I don't have Tourette syndrome. I'm sure much of the audience already knows that from our past conversation. I don't have Tourette syndrome. But, there are other mental health concerns that I have in my family that we've been dealing with. And I think for those of us that sort of live in these worlds, some of it's like a duh, right? Like I see things get shared. Like there was an article today talking about, there's been a 600% increase in calls to suicide hotlines. I read that and I said, well, duh. But I think that's new to a lot of people. A lot of people
Right.
they're not in this world. They don't know. They don't live with it every day. So I think the fact that so many more people are indeed living with it every day, circumstantially, of course, hopefully when things get quote unquote back to normal, they'll walk out of this with a little bit more compassion that will hopefully stay with them. And with any luck, maybe during this time, they'll learn a little bit about Tourette syndrome too.
That's what I'm hoping, that, that at least there's that level of compassion afterward, to where, all of us all of a sudden have a new reference point for anxiety, for isolation, for, just kind of appreciating it when other people have to deal with it kind of in the best of times. And just having that relatability on more of a general scale will hopefully, and I say hopefully, will make people kind of give others a break a little bit more, because, we've kind of had the opportunity to see firsthand or feel firsthand what it can be like. Mm-hmm. And I just hope that after all of this, the people who do deal with it and will continue to deal with this kind of stuff will have more allies, and at least have more of a sense of understanding from the outside, instead of it being such a shameful alien thing. It's, your liability. We all know how it feels now. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. That sort of other mentality, that they're the other. You're
right.
Something else. You're somebody different. We're not the same. That's not, I don't know what that's like. I don't know anybody who deals with that. You're over there, I'm over here. I think if we can get rid of that, but I think it always goes back to you have to be willing to scream from the rafters about what your experience is. For my personal history, my mother is bipolar, and while it wasn't me, and I certainly don't underestimate the distinction between me living with it versus my loved one living with it and talking about it. But, it was never built into me to be a shameful thing to discuss, right? I've always been very open about her struggles, and I've always been very open about what her struggles and how they've manifested have impacted me in the way that I view the world and the way that I manage stress, right? There's, that whole impact on me. And it's through that, my willingness to tell my personal story, that I've gained a lot of friends. I've earned the respect of colleagues, right? That willingness to sort of show one's truest self, even when it can be kind of scary. I think that the rewards by far outweigh the benefits. And my hope in the work that we do through the TAA is that we can, for those people that don't feel like they have the courage or don't want to, or are scared, or for whatever the reason is, don't want to, sort of tell their truth. My hope is that we can support them and give them that courage by showing them that they're not alone. And I think that that's really key, right? Knowing that you're not alone can make all the difference in the world.
Speaking of the work of the TAA, what else is going on? I know kind of adjusting in and out of the pandemic is sort of the operational thing for really any nonprofit or business right now. But as far as just things on the horizon for TAA programming, things coming up, what do you got going on? And Awareness Month obviously going on for a couple more weeks, so we're going to continue to share out information, for Awareness Month. After that, we have a lot of other virtual programs set up. We have our Young Professionals Network. We have adult focus webinars coming up, provider webinars, family programs. We're going to continue to do a lot of virtual programming because we're trying to meet people where they are. So we're trying to do more of that, make ourselves more accessible throughout the nation. So for those that
that their chapters can no longer host meetings or, whatever the case may be, so that everybody's needs are still being fulfilled. We're still planning our gala. Our gala is slated for October 29th. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year. As of right now, we are moving forward that it's going to be happening. Obviously, we're carefully monitoring what's going on with COVID, and if we need to pivot that event, we will. We'll pivot it the same way we pivoted conference. But, just a lot of online programming. We're adding additional youth ambassador and riser leaders training online. And we've been really trying to connect personally with the community. The staff's been actively making phone calls since this all sort of started in the beginning of March. Just calling and checking on people, making sure that everybody has what they need, and letting them know that we're here. Obviously, I'm the president of the organization. My priority first and foremost is that the organization survives this, that the organization will be here next year and for another 50 years to support people living with Tourette syndrome. And the best way that we as an organization can do that is to make sure that the people we serve are getting what they need, that we're fulfilling our mission and we're fulfilling our obligations of that mission, and we are, that we remain a trusted source of information for people when they need it. So that's really what our main focus is, and I'm hoping that once people get back on their feet and once states sort of get back to business, that the community will remember that and will support us philanthropically so that we can sustain and we can grow, and we can continue to serve the community in a meaningful way.
Well, definitely want to remind the audience, and they hear it a few times per episode, but the TAA is a big part of Tourette's podcast and gives support that does make it possible. And Tourette.org is where people can go to give their support to the Tourette Association and learn more about the programs and initiatives and webinars and things like that. Is there also a newsletter or anything people can sign up for just to kind of automate that?
Yeah, so you can go to our website and you can sign up for our monthly Tourette Connect newsletter. And then, of course, you can always, just call the office and, ask to be signed up as well. We're still answering the phones. Even though we're not in the office, we're still answering the phones.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much. I know times are kind of crazy and busy right now, but I really do appreciate you taking some time out to kind of catch up with us. And any new initiatives or anything like that the TA wants to talk about is, I think, important for the Tourette's podcast to talk about too. So I appreciate this.
Well, thank you, Ben. I always enjoy chatting with you, and I think I think us supporting you was one of the better decisions we've made. So I'm glad that we can be a part of this podcast and make it possible for you to continue telling everybody's stories and making sure that that we're all making a difference.
Thanks for listening. Big thanks to Amanda Talty and the Tourette Association of America for all they do. Please give your support if you can. At the very least, retweet and share the info they're putting out there on social media. And if you have some philanthropic muscle, then the TAA is a great place to flex it, to keep their programming fueled for all walks of life with and around Tourette syndrome and other tic disorders. Important to remember, their work is not just about Tourette syndrome. There are other tic disorders to consider as well. Also, yes, it's the Tourette Association of America. And because we have a global audience here, well, first, Tourette.org is a great place for information no matter where you live. I'd like to give a shout out to the other amazing Tourette organizations around the world, including Tourette Canada, Tourette's Action in the UK, Tourette Association of Australia, all over the world. But of course, there are underserved areas that need more awareness and support. I welcome your thoughts on that. Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com. Follow on Twitter @Tourette'sPod. Hitting refresh, 999 followers now, so just one follower away from 1,000. Whoa, update. The ticker just changed. 1,000 followers now. Thank you. Mariana is the 1,000th follower. Looks like she attends Sussex University in Brighton, England. Mariana, thank you. That's amazing. At Tourette's Pod on Twitter, please follow. At Tourette's Podcast on Instagram. Patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast to give individual backing to the show. Thanks to everybody doing that. That's amazing, and it absolutely helps sustain what we're doing here. Thanks to Sophia in the UK for her masterful administration of the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. Please join. Talk about episodes or whatever else is on your mind. TAA is online at tourette.org. Tourette's Podcast is part of the Geeks Rising Network, geeksrising.com. And we'll talk to you next week, and in the meantime, this is Ben.